Let's review Pesachim Daf Pei. Yesterday we concluded that the brisa that Reb Chia brought down that says that the tzitz is not maratza on Tumas HaTahoim for Ziva is referring to a case where a Zov on the seventh day of a Shiva Nekiyim, he doesn't know if he's going to complete the day Naki, he doesn't know if he'll have a Re'iyah. If he brought a Korban Pesach, and then afterwards he did have a Re'iyah, we'd say that the tzitz is not maratze on that tumas hatahoim, on that unknown tumah, and therefore he will have to bring another korban pesach by Pesach Sheni. The Gemara asks that Rabbi Yosi seems to argue on this halacha because Rabbi Yosi says that a shomer shoyim keneged yoim, who on erev Pesach she toiveled in the morning for her tumah of yesterday, and then she brought the korban pesach, and after her korban pesach she saw dam and she was soiser, zokt Rabbi Yosi that she for sure can't eat the korban pesach tonight. She's tummy now, but she is yotzeh the mitzvah of korban pesach, and she will not have to bring a korban pesach sheni. So that clearly says that the tzitz is maratze on this type of tumas hatahoim, because otherwise, why would we say that she doesn't need to bring a pesach sheni? The Gemara wants to answer that maybe Rabbi Yosi holds that whenever a woman is counting shomer shoyim keneged yoim or shiva nekiyim, as soon as the morning comes, that day counts. If she has a re'iyah that day, she's only tamei mikanu laba, but it's not soiser l'marfreya. And therefore, being that the korban pesach was brought after she toiveled, but before she had her next re'iyah, while the korban pesach was being processed, in fact, she was tahar, and therefore you don't even need it tzitz to be maratza because she was tahar at the time that the korban was processed. The Gemara challenges this taina and says it can't be that Rabbi Yosi holds that the tumah is only mikanu laba, because the brisa brings a quoting Rabbi Yosi that specifically says that a shomer shoyim keneged yoim who had a re'iyah, or a zov counting his shiva nekiyim, if he became tamei and he had a re'iyah, we say that even things that they touched before they had the re'iyah will be tamei. Anything that they sat on or lied on or walked on even before they had the re'iyah will be tamei. So clearly you see that the tumah continues on from the original re'iyah once he soiser by having a re'iyah, or once she soiseres by having a re'iyah. Zok the Gemara, that Rabbi Yosi says that it's tamei l'mafreya is only midirabanan, but midiraisa, in fact, it is mikanu lahaba, and therefore you don't need it tzitz to be maratza, because we say in actuality during the processing of the korban, the zav or the zava was actually tar at the time. The Gemara says that this understanding of Rabbi Yosi, that it's tamei l'mafreya is only midirabanan, this is actually how Rabbi Oishia also understood Rabbi Yosi, because Rabbi Yochanan said a zav in the seventh day, if he sees on the seventh day, he's soiser on the seventh day, it's not soiser to shiva nekiyim, rather it's considered a new re'iyah, which means it's only tamei mikanu laba. Zok Rabbi Oishia, Rabbi Yochanan would be consistent with Rabbi Yosi, who says that the tumah is l'mafreya. It must be because he also understands Rabbi Yosi as saying that the tumah l'mafreya is only midirabanan. Frek the Gemara, now that you're saying in Rabbi Yosi that you don't need the ritzah tzitz to cover for a zov who had a re'iyah after the korban was processed, well then we have to go back to understand Reb Chia's brisa. Reb Chia said that the ritzah tzitz of tumas hatahoim only applies to tumas meis. What is it excluding? It can't be excluding ziva, because ziva is not relevant, because it's only tamei mikanu laba. So the Gemara says it must be speaking about the tumah of a sheretz, and although there are shittas who hold that you could shech, that you could make zrika for someone who's tamei sheretz, since anyway tonight it'll be tahar and we will be able to eat the korban pesach, we would hold that ein sheichten v'zorken al tumah sheretz, or that brisa of Reb Chia would hold ein sheichten v'zorken al tumah sheretz, and therefore the chiddush of the brisa is that tumas hatahoim, the tzitz maratza only for a tumas meis, but a tumas sheretz it would not be maratza for. The Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Yosi, that when someone has a stira, someone has a re'iyah, it's only tamei mikanu laba, meaning it's disconnected from the previous re'iyahs. How is it possible for a woman to be a zava gedola if she's always tar in between, and each re'iyah is considered a new issue? The Gemara says it would only be possible under two possibilities. Either if she was flowing steady for 3 days, or if she flowed steady for the entire Bein Hashmashos of 2 days in a row, because then at the beginning of each day she was already Soiser, and therefore she was never able to come to Tahira for 3 days, and therefore she would become a Zova Gedola. The Gemara wants to know, if you hold that the Tumas at the Haim will allow, even for a Kohen, the tzitz will be Maratzo. So even if the Kohen was Tomei, B'tumas Meis, B'tumas at the Haim, the tzitz would be Maratzo. If you hold like that, we know this halacha was said Lagabi Korban Pesach, and Lagabi the Korban of a Nazir. Would it also apply to the Korban Tamid? The Gemara wants to suggest we should have a Kal V'chomer. Madach the Korban Pesach, which if you yourself are Tomei, the owner of the Korban is Tomei, you're not allowed to bring it. You'd have to bring a Pesach Sheni. Yet, Tumas at the Haim will not disqualify you from bringing the Korban Pesach. The Korban Tamid, which if its owners are Tomei, meaning if you have Roiv Klai Yisrael as Tomei, where you would bring it B'tumah, surely it should also have the Kula that Tumas at the Haim should not disqualify the Kohen from working on this Korban. The Gemara responded that something that you know from a halacha l'Moshe Messinai, you cannot teach it as something else through a Kal V'chomer. And the Gemara proved it because Rabbi Lezer commented once to Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva wanted to use a Kal V'chomer to say that if the Tumah that a Nazir acquires, if he touches Etzem Kesoira, if that messes up his Naziris, surely if these Nazir touched a Revius Dam, it should ruin his Naziris. Because Madach and Etzem Kesoira, which is not Matama Ba'oil, will ruin the Naziris, surely a Revius Dam, which is Matama Ba'oil, should ruin the Naziris. Rabbi Eliezer responded, the whole way we know that Etzem Kesoira ruins the Naziris is through a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. And you cannot teach from a halacha l'Moshe Messinai to anything else using a Kal V'chomer. So Zokt Rava, you wouldn't be able to say that the Korban Tamid would allow a Kohen to work on it if he had Tumas Tahaim, unless you learned it from a Gzer Shava of my Adam Adai. The Gemara now goes back. We've already understood that the Makar of Tumas Tahaim, that the Tzitz Maratza, is from a Halacha L'Moshe Messinai. But the Gemara had to arrive at that conclusion through a process. And now we're going to go through that process. The Gemara at first thought that it might be a pasuk. And the Gemara brought 3 Shitas. Rabbi Lazar, who said, it says, V'chiyamus meis olav, meaning olav, he has to be aware of it. Rabbi Yochanan says, it says, B'derech v'chaika lachem, they have to be aware of it. And Rabbi Shimon Lakish says, B'derech, we compare Tumah to derech, it has to be Golul HaKoil. The Gemara challenges this, because we have a brayso that says that it's not considered Tumas HaToim unless there's no one in the world who knew about it. According to Rabbi Lazar, if everybody knew about it, as long as he didn't know, that's also called Tumas HaToim. It says Alav. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who said Lachem, it means only 2 people have to know about it to make it Ois Tumas HaToim, while the brayso says nobody's allowed to know about it. And according to Rabbi Shimon Lakish, who said that everybody has to know about it, it has to be Golul HaKoil, for sure you would say it's Tumas HaToim even if one person knows about it. So all of these 3 limudim would not be consistent with the halacha l'maisa that Tumas HaToim only applies if there's nobody in the world who knows about it. So Zak the Gemara, it must be a halacha l'Moshe Messinai, and these psukim, these limudim that we just brought down, will just be an esmachta b'alma. Then the Gemara says that this halacha, that Tumas HaToim, the tzitz meratza, that means even if we did a shchita, but we didn't do the zrika yet, and before the zrika, we found out, in fact, that a person was tamei from a Tumas HaToim, you're allowed to lechatchila go and do the zrika. And the Gemara proves it from a brayso that says, "Hamoitzi meis mushkav l'rochvay shel derech." If we found a mace that blocked an entire road, it was under the ground, but it crossed the whole road, so anybody who walked over it for sure became tamei. So if someone walked over that road, he's surely not allowed to eat truma because he's tamei. However, if it was a Korban Pesach or a Nazir, we would allow the Zrika to occur because the Lashon HaBrayso says it's tar, and tar also always means that it's tar moving forward. You can treat him like he's tar, which means we would allow the Zrika to occur. So you clearly see that even though we've already found out that this Nazir or this Yid became Tamei, we can still make the Zrika of his carbon, provided that the Shechita was done before he found out that he was Tamei. The Gemara then wants to analyze this brayso. And the brayso says, if you found a mace that crosses a road completely, Anybody who walks over this tummy. Now we know normally if it's a Savak Tuma, B'Shus Harabim, it's Sveikai Tahar. So the reason why in this case we say a person's for sure tummy is because it's impossible to cross that road without having come in contact with the mace, and therefore one is tummy. So the Gemara says that's only if there's absolutely no way around it, and we're 100% sure that this person walking over the road must have come in contact with the mace. But if there's any way around it, A, or B is if the mace wasn't intact, it was different limbs, but there was some open space in between the limbs, in all those cases, we would say that the person would be tar. It's only if we're 100% sure. So the Gemara says even if there's different limbs, but the person is carrying packages, which means he would shift back and forth, or he was on a wagon, which would mean he would be covering over a big part of the road, there, in fact, we say for sure he did come in contact and he would be tummy. But if there's any break and the person's walking, and there's even a possibility that he didn't become tummy, we say Savak Tamer B'Shus Harabim Sveikai Tahar. Then the Gemara says, what is a Tumas HaToim? A Tumas HaToim is something that nobody could possibly have known about, and the Gemara gives examples. If the mace was covered in straw, in earth, or rocks, like something fell over him and covered him up, and no one ever saw it, and no one could have ever seen it, that's Tumas HaToim. But if the mace is found in water, or in a dark place, or amongst some rocks, where it's possible that he could have been seen, that is not considered Tumas HaToim. Then the Gemara goes to a new Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses a carbon pesach that became tamei. If most of the carbon became tamei, or roiv of the meat became tamei, the halacha is you have to take that and burn it by the Beis HaMikdash. You can't just burn it in your backyard. You have to be matriach to go to the Beis HaMikdash and burn it there, and you could even use the wood from the Atzei Maracha. The Gemara tells us that the reason for this is to embarrass somebody. You should be ashamed of yourself that you weren't careful and you were negligent and you allowed your carbon pesach to become tamei. Therefore, you burn it by the bira. However, if just a little bit of your carbon pesach became tamei, which is not negligent, or if it's noisar, there you could burn that in your backyard with your own personal wood. The Mishnah tells us that people who were cheap didn't want to use their own wood, so even if they were allowed to burn the noisar or the little bit that became tamei in their own backyards, they would anyway burn it at the Beis HaMikdash so they could take advantage of using the wood supplied by the Beis HaMikdash.